Welcome to the TufFish Show. I am so excited to bring to you Alexa Bigwarfe. Alexa, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor.
I'm so excited you are here, and I would love for you to start by getting into how did you get into writing?
Well, it's one of those stories that is not just an easy little, quick story. So I'll try to give the cliff notes of it. I have been a voracious reader since the time that I could pick up a book. I would spend all my allowance on buying books, all those kinds of things, and I always kind of wanted to be a writer. I wrote and self illustrated my very first book when I was 6, called My
Oh.
Unicorn. But so I wanted to be a writer, but as my life changed and as we moved different places, my dad was in the army and things like that, I developed a real passion for international relations. So I didn't go into writing or journalism. I went into government and poli sci, wound up going into the military as an intelligence officer, and then worked in Homeland Security. And through that time, my job was very heavy in technical writing. I wrote analysis, I wrote all this stuff, and I really enjoyed writing. But it wasn't until after we suffered a personal tragedy. My youngest child was an identical twin. They were born early with a very severe syndrome called twin to twin transfusion syndrome, and one of my daughters passed away after 2 days.
Mm.
And so at that point in time, I started blogging as an outlet of kind of like, I felt like I needed to write and to not just to chronicle my grief, but I became very, very passionate about advocacy because there were a lot of things that happened in the pregnancy journey that I just felt like could have been handled differently. I started advocating about the loss of a twin, about the loss of a child in general, about my other daughter spent 3 months in the NICU. So there were lots of things that I just wanted to share with people. And I really like reconnected with my love of writing through this time, and also saw the impact that my words were having on other people. I began to receive some emails from people saying, thank you so much. I no longer feel alone, or this really helped me, or, all those types of things. And eventually I decided to pull together, I started connecting with a bunch of other bloggers and people that were doing things around grief. And I decided that what I really wanted to do was to write a book for grieving mothers, because there's so much literature out there that's written by professionals, that's written by psychologists, and it's a it's very sterile, it's very technical, it's very, what's the word I'm looking for, just very so I
Clinical?
clinical, that's the word. And so we pulled together over 30 parents, mostly moms, but a handful of dads, and we wrote Sunshine After the Storm, a survival guide for the grieving mother. And really, not only was my love of writing really ignited by this point in time, but my love of figuring out the enigma of publishing just like set on fire, because I was in intelligence and I like puzzles, I like figuring things out, and publishing, holy smokes, is there so much to figure out with writing, publishing, and then trying to sell a book. So yeah, that's where it all began.
I love that you took something so deeply personal, but you used writing as a cathartic way to help you heal. But in
Mhm.
doing so, the fact that you got so much good feedback from other women, other parents saying, you see me, you
Yeah,
understand me, thank you for helping me feel like it's not just me, that I'm not alone. That's what a beautiful gift you gave
thank
to
you.
them and to your daughters.
Thank you.
That's beautiful.
Well, and
That's
it's the
beautiful.
reason I named my press Cat Biggie Press, because her name was Catherine Bigwarfe. So she's very present in. It's been almost 10 years, and she's very present in everything that I do. So it has been a tremendous healing thing, and just what I've learned over time is that there is so much healing through writing our stories, whether you ever write them for anyone else to read or not. And a lot of the authors that I have worked with, and the people that I have worked with, are writing books around inspiration, grief, loss, healing, all of that, as well as many, many, many other things. But that's where my passion lies.
I can feel it. And I love that you do that, because you're creating a space to help other people feel like they can do this too.
Yeah,
That and it doesn't mean that it might not be challenging in some spots. There's a dance to figure out, is it a scar, or are you still a bit in the mess, and how do you figure out when is the
yeah,
right time or how
yeah.
to write about it? But the fact that you've done that, you can offer that guidance and those thoughts. Do you have some specific tips you might even add right now as to how someone might go through or figure out if it's a mess still or the scar?
Well, what I encourage people to do is, and the reason the name Cat Biggie came around was because I knew it was messy in the beginning, and I wasn't sure that I was ready for all the people in my life that I knew to consume what I was putting out there. So I started blogging anonymously under Cat Biggie as my name. And so the biggest piece of advice that I would give is that if you're there's a lot of anger that goes with grief. There's a lot of anger, a severe disappointment. I mean, so many people and things can disappoint you. There's a lot of self anger, especially for women who have gone through a miscarriage or infant loss. Or any type of child loss. There's a lot of guilt. There's a lot of feelings wrapped up in there. So the biggest thing I would say is to start writing, especially the super emotional, super raw stuff in a journal or in a place that only you're consuming it, and come back to it later when you can have a little bit of a fresher perspective on it. Then you can tighten it up and put it out there. But there's blogs, you don't have to start with a book. There's blogs, there's websites, there's journals, there's anthologies, there's lots of places where you can get your feet wet with the writing of it by submitting or writing in places like that. But I mean, really the best advice is to just sit down and write. And there's no particular order. You can write it chronologically if you want to. You can write whatever you were thinking about in that day. But when it comes to trauma and loss, be very gentle with yourself, and especially around things that can trigger you. Because for me now, speaking of clinical, like I've written and talked about my story so much that I'm kind of like a robot now about it. Like I don't get emotional like I was in the beginning, but in the beginning, I couldn't even talk through our story without breaking into, just horrible tears and all of those types of things. So, or just being really, taken back to that moment. So also know that time helps you. And so if you can take a step back and do things like that. But yeah, just write however you want to, in a journal, in a Word doc, in a Google Doc, and get those feelings out there. And the good thing is that there are editors. If your writing is messy and you don't know how to clean it up, there are plenty of people that can help you do that.
Actually, now that you said, I'm a developmental editor. And so those are the very kind of projects that I actually really enjoy the most, is because when that author trusts you with their work, you know that
Mhm.
the whole intention is to create a safe space.
Right.
And especially when it is something like that, it's an honor to be a part of that book and to keep their voice, but to help them shape it in a way. And if that means you need to approach it a little differently, a little gingerly in some way, or even say, hey,
Mhm.
let's tackle this part just by itself before we move any further, you're honoring that space of that person, because
Right.
there's a story that they're wanting to share and they've trusted you to help them get it out there. You're like one of the first set of eyes. So
Exactly.
respecting that is so important.
And, a lot of writers will join writer critique groups and
Mhm.
things like that to kind of, and the one thing that I would say about that, being in a writing critique group myself, it's often very difficult when someone comes in with a piece that is very raw and because the job of the writing critique group is to provide feedback. And if it's super emotional and super raw, like people don't feel like they can give feedback, like critical feedback to the improvement of the writing, because they don't want to hurt your feelings. So if I think you can find groups of people who are writing about grief and loss, and maybe form your own little critique group amongst a safe net of people who can know how to respond to your writing and still offer that feedback as well.
I think that's so important, because you're right. It could be the feedback that you get. Someone says that was heavy, or that was emotional, or that was triggering even.
Right.
And what do you do with that? How
Right.
do you synthesize that? Or how do you, or maybe it's, that's okay, but maybe I write an introduction that gives you a heads up that this is what's coming down the pike, and I leave it just the way it is. It just depends upon what that felt like for you, and what type of feedback you got to
Yeah.
work with.
Yeah. And understanding and knowing who your target audience is too is a big piece, because you could be in a group of 6 writers that none of them have experienced any kind of traumatic loss or these types of emotions. So, lots of things to consider, but you
Yes.
don't have to feel pressured to, I say just start by just writing when your heart feels compelled to get the story out, it's very helpful. You don't have to share with anybody if you don't want to.
Exactly. Exactly. I would love for you to talk about something that, like you said, it's a puzzle and publishing, because
Mhm.
so many times, a lot of times the listeners are thinking about, I'm working on this book, but another phase of that is I've published this book. So now what? Or I have my manuscript. How do I go about the publishing space? And they're putting themselves out there. It's one step to get to be published. It's another step to say, I have this book and now I have to sell it.
Right.
So since that is a big piece of what you are about, with just embodying all of that with writing and publishing and selling, would you talk a little bit about some of those processes and any
Yeah.
guidance you can give there?
Yeah. So, there's a lot of moving pieces when it comes to publishing a book. There's so many things that you have to know. So I would say, even when you first start writing your book, you should be thinking about how you're going to market and launch your book. And people always look at me like with big eyes when I say that, because they're like, how can I possibly even, but you really have to, because if you're going to spend the time and energy to put a book out into the world, there need to be people that are ready to consume it. And there's a lot of people that just assume that a book goes on Amazon and people just start buying it. And I'm here to tell you that that is a big myth. Unless you're famous or have a big email list or have, just a lot of resources going into it, like that rarely happens. So my first thing is to tell people to start thinking about what you're going to do to create your platform, to grow your email list, to do all those types of things, to find readers, all of that as early as you can in the process. But another part of that is that in thinking of who's going to be buying your book, it also helps you write your book better. Because if you're thinking about the person, I like to identify one person in mind, and I know how they're going to receive a book, then I write in the way that I know is going to be attractive to them. When it comes to the publishing side, if there are multiple routes to publishing, so you can self-publish with assistance. There are lots and lots of companies like my company, Write, Publish, Sell, and other companies out there that offer assistance in all the things that are really hard to figure out, like copyrights and ISBNs and PCIP blocks, and just all the things that people's eyes just start getting bigger and bigger as you're like, I have to do what? And also figuring out a good cover designer, layout design, all of that kind of stuff. So you can start researching or finding free resources and reading what you can read, listening to self-publishing podcasts, doing things like that, so that you can prepare yourself for what you're moving into. And if you have zero like technical background at all, or graphic design or anything like that, I strongly, just like I would tell you to make sure you've had your book professionally edited, I would tell you to look for professional, even if it's freelancers or companies that can help you move through that. There are a lot of elements and pieces that set you up for success or failure depending on what you're trying to do. And if you don't do those things right before the book launches, yes, the beauty and glory of self-publishing is that you can always go back and fix things. The downside is that it's a first impression. You have that first chance to get it right and to get it in front of people. And if you've made mistakes along the way, that are detrimental to you at the beginning, it could wind up in really negative reviews. It could wind up in just nobody even seeing your book because it's not set up properly. It could wind up in a whole lot of things that you want to try to avoid. So my second major piece of advice in that is to make sure that you're not falling to this idea that because you're self-publishing, you can just write your book and design your book cover on Canva and throw it up on Amazon and that's good to go. And because there are millions of books being published, and nothing will happen if that's what you do. So thinking of it as a business project, as a product that you are marketing and selling, and doing everything that you can to make sure that it's done as well and professionally as possible. With this comes a price tag, whether you're doing it on your own and just reaching out to people to help you for bits and pieces, which is what I did with Sunshine After the Storm, because I didn't have a big budget. I did hire a cover designer. I did hire an editor. I taught myself how to do the layout, and that was good because I learned it, but bad because there were some serious mistakes that I made because I wasn't a book professional at that point in time and didn't understand the all the many intricacies that go into the layout and design of a book. So, set yourself a budget, make sure that you know what you can do and what you need someone else to do for you, and start planning more than just the writing. And this, Jennifer, is very hard for writers, because I hear, especially, creative writers, whether it's fiction or creative nonfiction or memoirists, saying, I don't want to think about any of that stuff. I just want to write. So if that's the case, if you have no intention of doing any of those things, then you really need to either look at figuring out how to make yourself appealing to an agent or a publisher so that you can publish traditionally, or you need to start looking at hybrid presses, which are a nice cross between independently publishing on your own and going traditional. They operate professionally, but there is a fee for services structure. And it's a good middle ground for people who want all the extra support, but also want to not have to do all the all the things other than writing.
But that's the thing too, is that to your point about I haven't necessarily heard the writing part in that sense as much as I've heard them say, I'm scared of it. I mean, I like doing the writing because I'm scared of the business side, and where the business side is scary, I'm like, that's actually the fun part too. It's actually
it can be
fun. It can be really
fun.
fun. Yeah. And the other side to that is that when you look at it as a business, it takes some pressure off in a sense, because you are expanding your creativity. It actually does unleash a bit more creativity because you're looking at different things, and that goes back to improving your writing. So to me, the fact that you've shared it in the context of think about this as a business, that there's so many parts to this, that is such a powerful way to look at it, because a writer is in a business. The book is a part of in my mind, I see it as a part of an ecosystem. It is one part, and you're working, and you have so many other parts to go along with it.
Yeah.
And it also helps you to essentially detach a little in some ways, if it becomes, because you're able to say, it's a piece, but I'm working on these other things too.
Yeah. Well, and also, I mean, the cool thing about, there are a lot of negative things about all of our advances with the internet and all of those things, as I'm experiencing with my teenage son right now. But, but there are also really, really amazing opportunities that just didn't exist a decade ago for people to think of creative outside of the box partnerships and opportunities. For example, when I published my first book, I didn't develop a marketing strategy because I had no intention of marketing my book. I didn't want to sell the book. I wanted to give the book to grieving mothers, because I had a very big mission in life that no mother who has just lost a pregnancy, infant, or child should have to buy a book for herself, right? So I started finding ways that I could donate the book, get the book in different organizations. I partnered with some other organizations who sent out care packages to grieving mothers and made an arrangement for them to buy them at wholesale to include in their books and things like that. But the upside for the marketing side is that as all of those efforts, even though it took a big investment of time and energy on my part, it led to just natural marketing of the book. So people see it, they get it. We donate it every year to the local hospitals, to labor and delivery, and the NICUs, so those types of things. But that's the fun, creative part about thinking about your book and how you can get it out into the world. We worked with a children's book author who published a book for hearing impaired children. And it's about the journey of them getting the hearing impairment diagnosis, and the fact that they felt so alone and they didn't know what to do and all of these types of things. So it's a children's book, a picture book about this journey. But she, the author, Valerie, was able to partner with several major other organizations who support hearing loss, who support all of these types of things. And, so her marketing is not what somebody else might consider, the traditional book marketing methods of finding reviewers and doing this and running ads and doing that. It was connections with people and relationships and getting the books out through that way. So there is a lot of, you might think business is not creative, but actually there's so much, as you mentioned, so much creativity that goes into how am I going to make this a business?
And to your point about Valerie James Abbott wrote Pat a
Yes.
Pillow, and she was on our show.
Oh,
And
yay.
just
So y'all already know
yeah,
Valerie.
yes, and she's phenomenal. But to your point, the creativity, the way she went about that was just
Mhm.
it's just beautiful. That's a great example.
Yeah.
And the other part about what you were talking about with selling, sometimes that word can feel scary to an author, especially.
Yeah.
So reframing it and calling it sharing. You are
Yes.
sharing something that
Yes.
you've
Yes. Yes.
created.
Yes.
It feels different, and it doesn't mean that you're not exchanging a value for value. It means that you're excited about this and you're sharing something you've created. So
Yeah.
then it's a natural extension to want to talk about it and find
Well, and
ways to get it in their hands.
exactly. And it doesn't have to be like we've talked about two really heavy topics there. Let me give a completely opposite side of the spectrum here. Light rom-com books. So I am writing I've had this story, I've been working on it for like 10 years and it's gone through different iterations and all this stuff. And I finally just decided I am writing this book. So it's a light romance. I don't know that I would classify it as a rom-com, but the chick lit category went away. So many of the books that were chick lit are now falling into rom-com. Anyway, the point is like I had as a primarily nonfiction author who writes very serious topics on grief, loss, parenting, and books on writing, which are all very different topics. But it was really hard for me to wrap my mind around writing this quote unquote silly little romance. That was the mindset issue that I had. But let me tell you what happened. First, a piece of advice: whatever you're writing, you should be reading that genre voraciously, like as many books as you can. And so I started just consuming all of these. My writing coaching gave me a list of books that she really liked and really enjoyed and felt like would be a good kind of marker for where I would fall in the marketplace. And I just started reading and reading and reading these books. And you know what? It has brought me so much enjoyment to end my day every day with just these light-hearted little romance, funny, sometimes really funny, sometimes just sweet little stories. And to your point of what you were saying a minute ago is that there's somebody who needs what you're putting out regardless of the topic. It doesn't have to be as deep as hearing loss or infant loss or any of those. Like somebody just needs a light, funny book to read at the end of their long, hard day. It's been a hard 2 years for most people, and
Mhm.
to find something that just allows me to finish the day with a smile, it's important. So regardless of regardless of what you're writing, there's somebody who needs that book.
I love that you said that, because even with a thriller, you can say
Yes,
this is an escape. Fantasy is an
exactly.
escape. So, and
Exactly.
they want that mental escape because
Yes,
maybe they want to solve a puzzle, but they want to solve a puzzle in a different way. And a
right.
thriller is providing that space versus sitting there
Yes.
in their corporate job trying to solve these other type of problems in their
Yes.
day job, if you will. So
And those
yeah.
types of books have skyrocketed in this time frame because people do want the escape,
Mhm.
so yeah, it's
A-
great.
Absolutely. I would love for you to talk about something that is near and dear to your heart, which is the summit that you have hosted. And it
Yes.
really is a nice blend of writing, publishing, and selling. Would
Yes.
you please talk about it?
Well, speaking of figuring out the business stuff, like we have an entire day of this conference dedicated to business tools and business training and things that you can do to additional revenue streams and all those types of things. But the Women in Publishing Summit, it is really my heart of what we do each year. And it runs live in March every year, because Women's History Month is March. And we usually have a wrap-up ceremony on Women's History, International Women's Day. Um, and it started it in 2017 because I was at the time consuming any information that I could from anywhere that I could. And if in the 2015, 2016, 2017 timeframe, that's when online summits started making a big boom in the world. And there were just summits happening all over the place. So I was attending several of them, and I was looking around and I was noticing, I was like, I work with all women all the time, women writers, women editors, women book designers, women publishers. And I was like, and there'd be like one or two females in an entire summit, and diversity was almost like nothing, no diversity whatsoever. So I was kind of brainstorming. At that point in time, I had run two online conferences for writers. And as I started thinking about the next year's conference, I was like, I want to make this a celebration of women in the industry, women writers, women who are getting things done across the board, editors, graphic designers, anyone who's involved in the process. I want to bring them forward. I want to provide tools and resources and information. And, there's so many ways to do this. There's so many ways to do this. If anyone ever asks me, what is the one correct way to write, publish, and sell your book? There is no one correct way. It seems like every author we work with does something just a little bit different based on, because that's the way this world works, based on what their genre is, what their, all of that. So anyway, we branded and started preparing in August of 2017 to do the Women in Publishing Summit for the first time in March of 2018. I think I have my years right. What really was divine timing was in October of that year was when the Me Too movement kicked off. So right after we announced that we were doing this, and all of a sudden there was a huge focus on women talking about women's stuff, not just about the Me Too movement, but just about the fact that we needed to celebrate women more and to bring them forward more and to hear women's voices and stories. So it just culminated really, really well. So we had our first year, yes, in 2018, 2019. Oh goodness, I'm sorry. COVID brain, this 2022 is going to be our 5th year. So y'all do the math. Anyway, it's just grown and grown and grown. And last year was so beautiful because everybody had been in lockdown for a year a year when we did the summit last year. And people were just overjoyed to find community and to find people who were talking about the same kinds of things, the collective grief and the anxiety and the mindset issues and all these other things. So we try to make it a conference that really talks about things that women would be interested in talking about, because we market differently. We talk about ourselves differently. We have different challenges in our lives. We have mindset issues that most men never even come across. Some do, but so we incorporate all of those things into the conference. And yeah, it's a really wonderful community. And that's the other benefit too, is that it's not just 1 week and then we're done. We do year-round training and webinars and community and all types of things, so that when you create those relationships, you can build on them. And I just want to tell you that relationships are probably one of the most important things in this industry. Relationships with other providers, with other people who are doing the work, cover designers, editors, all of that, but also relationships with other writers and how much you can support each other through cross promotions and all of that, and connections to other professionals in the industry, potentially connecting with publishers or marketers or all these kinds of things. And my business and my writing have grown tremendously because of the personal relationships that I have made in the last decade. And that's really what we try to put into our conference and into our community.
But I can feel that with all of what you've talked about, between the books, between the navigating the publishing space and doing so, thus creating a space to help and support in a bigger way.
Yeah.
I think that each one created its own space to support in big ways. And so
Yeah.
it's just kind of come full circle. So I think that that's just, thank you for what you
Well,
have
thank
done.
you.
How
Well,
did go
I'm
ahead.
sorry, I didn't mean
Go
to interrupt
ahead. Go ahead.
No, but one of the biggest motivations, and I feel this is really important to say, is that there are a lot of people out there in our industry who don't have good intentions. And I don't ever come out and name people or do anything like that. But what I do find very, very important is to make sure that as much as I can do to put out there so that people will not find themselves in a situation where they're taken advantage of is really important too. And that's a big piece of our community too, is making sure, we vet our speakers, we vet our sponsors, we use our sponsors. That's one thing, it's not just people that are paying us money to be part of it. Our sponsors are people that we use their tools and products. And I don't have somebody come on as a sponsor if I haven't experienced what they do for myself. And that's really important. And our community appreciates that. And, they know that if I recommend someone, it's because we trust them. And for me, trust is so important because this is, so much to do and so much happening. I want to make sure that you have good people on your team.
Yeah, but it's still, all of it's stemming from, to me, the root of love.
Yes.
Love of
Yes.
service.
Well, I hope so.
It feels, but the books, the journey to help other writers through publishing, and the journey from helping them from publishing even into selling or thinking about the whole pieces, it all comes to love. And I love that you have done that. Thank you.
Thank you.
So much.
Thank you.
How can people connect with you, Alexa? How can they connect with you? How can they get your book or books?
Yes.
How is that possible?
So, while all of my books right now are published through Biggie Press, and then we have a children's book company called Purple Butterfly Press. But probably the best place is just to go look for the Women in Publishing Summit, because almost everything we do is cross-branded. So if you get on our email list for that, you'll get access to everything. If you come to the conference, you will get far more than what the conference ticket is in value, in benefits and resources and tools and all of that stuff. But that's at womeninpublishingsummit.com. And you can find us on all the social media at Women in Publishing. Some of them we tried to do Women in Publishing Summit everywhere, but some of them are a little bit different handles. But if you just search Women in Publishing Summit, wherever you are, you can find us.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being on the show. I am so glad you were here.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.